Hello everybody, Halo NXT here, with a deck profile video. Honestly, I was planning to try to do all three in one sitting, but with this first one taking as long as it did just to do, I decided against it, and instead make it so that I do a different video for each one of the decks that I've used throughout the ETF. So you have a bit of those to look forward to. Yeah, I had to record this in post because of this, so that's why you do not currently see the deck right now. Anyways, I do hope you enjoy this, and with any luck, you may learn something, and hey, maybe you guys can teach me a few things, since I know I'm not the best builder in the world. With that said, on to the profile. With that said, let's go over the deck I used by the time I was facing Ninjago, which is the one that you see before you right now. So, first off, we have Lightweight Gearfried, who is only appearing in this deck, so he was, at the beginning, basically a early replacement for one of the Lords, but in the finalized version, this is what would have been the finalized version of it. If you want to be more true to form, all I need to do is say at least 3 and you get what the deck actually looked like. With Lightweight Gearfried basically serving as Phosphage's replacement, requiring you to have 5 or more light monsters with different names in the graveyard, something I could very much do, and basically give you a negate. So hey, it's a powerful card, give you a means of restraining your opponent. 2800 attack points is also nothing to sneeze at. Its summoning condition is a bit more strict than the Lord's, but hey, it works. Again, its main use was to be a filler for Phosphorage. However, as I've stated, it's powerful enough on its own that it could be kept in, just because of its power to negate as an additional bonus. Now we move on to the 3 Lords, who I have in my deck at the point I was facing Ninjago, who are all level 8 monsters with 2800 attack and 2200 defense, with respective attribute and typing changes. The reason I went in the order I went in is because I wanted to choose the more weaker Lords first, because let's face it, these 3 down here, Phosphorage, Windrose, and Grandstar, are pretty strong because of the nature of their effects. So I was going to start with the weaker effects and move on to the stronger ones. And first off, Mountain Glacier, like all the Lords, Mountain Glacier requires you to have exactly 5 of their attribute in the graveyard, which, for those who know, is no trouble at all for a Saber deck. Mountain Glacier's 2-hand card rip can be really good early on, because that means you are stripping your opponent of 2 resources at their disposal. Meaning, hey, now they have 2 less options, and you may have to squarely ruin them. Making it a pretty decent early game card, Lord, but when you get and decent in the middle game. Late game, though, it's rendered a lot weaker when people don't have much of a hand, but at the same time, that means you can decimate any ability to fight. So it has its strengths and it has its weaknesses. Moving on is the first Lord I had, Pyrox, who is the fire attribute. He is basically a ring of destruction with his effect, which again would let you get rid of a nasty monster pretty easily, as since it uses a ritual attack, you can easily destroy, say, a powered up Dark Rebellion, and it would just give you 1250 points of damage to both sides. It can really accelerate the duel to have that, and again, being able to break something that has a powered up effect to its attack is really useful. But again, it is just dwarfed by Phosphorage, so yeah. It's still usable, it's still strong, but it does dwarf in comparison to the light monster. Has its uses, but not as strong, hence why it was the first one I had. And now, the Lord I probably use the most, honestly, Umbra Mirage. is the dark attribute one, which requires, again, 5 darks. Its stress effect of adding one monster 1500 or less attacks doesn't seem like much, especially in this version of the deck. But wait till you see it in other versions of the deck and you'll see why it can be nasty as hell to have that kind of surge power. Because, say, for example, Elemental Grace, who is not in this deck, technically, despite easily being able to be a 3k beater when it's summoned, it starts off as technically having 0 attack, making it searchable by Umbra Mirage, so it definitely has its uses. Now moving on to Lapa Yamana. He is one of the big cards for Elementsabers. Kind of the reason why I was restricted to only being able to have one of them. For those who have been wondering why, I've only been running 1 mana. Sending 2 monsters from the hand to graveyard special summon this card is a bit of a costly effect at glance. But when combined with Palace, which I'll talk about later, it can be really busted. Because if any of the monsters you send are Elementsabers, then based on the attributes of those monsters, you get effects that protect both him and any monster that has Elementsaber or Elemental Lord in its name. When an Earth is battle, can't be destroyed by battle, water and fire can't be destroyed by effects, and lines of darknesses cannot be targeted by card effects. Needless to say, getting all 3 effects passively on the field would be stupidly busted, and is kind of why, at least in an RP sense, which is also why when you see a actual proper Saber deck, they usually try vomiting out 2 manas like as soon as possible. Because if you noticed, this effect isn't once per turn. So you could use Palace to summon 1, and then as long as you have the other Saber type in your hand, you could summon the other mana, and boom, now you have all 3 protections. Making for a very strong defensive field. With 2400 attack and 2100 defense, he may not seem that great compared to the Lords, but he still has the highest offensive power of all the Sabers, and rivals for the defensive power, so you can't really complain there. Next up is Chaos Sorcerer. I've only used him in 2 decks that I'll be showing off today. But his ability as a Chaos, he banishes a Lion of Dark to summon himself. And again, he's another way I can get rid of something that I usually could not fight over, because being able to target something and banish it, as long as it's a face-up monster, can get rid of some nasty, nasty things. And sure, losing the ability to attack with this guy is a bit painful. But with 300 attack, he's kind of in the middle ground, so it's neither negative or positive, so take it as you will. Now, moving on to the monsters that can be normal summoned, we start off with Mohiu. Elementsaber Mohiu is the most offensive of all the Elementsabers, with the highest attack value and 0 defense. But as you probably will realize, while the other 4 attributes have utility, they help the deck accelerate its plays, Mohiu and Lapalaya specifically are designed to help restrain your opponent once you get to a later stage. Such as how Mohiu is effectively a Book of Moon on legs. Because for the simple cost of sending 1 Elementsaber from your hand to the graveyard, you can make a face-up monster go to face-down defense position. And like all Sabers, he too holds, besides mana, he holds the ability to freely change his attribute till the end of the turn while in the graveyard. This plays into how you bring out the Elemental Lords, as with this effect you can easily control and get to the exact 5 without much issue. Like all my Sabers, I run 2 of each, so you would probably have seen that. Because 3 is something you should have been a bit too much, and I need multiple so I can burn through the effects. Moving on to Sikkim Knight. A level 4, 1700 attack, 100 defense monster. He's not Saber, but he has his uses hard, because again, a level 4 can help me make some other things, especially when we get to the extra deck. He can also be easy fodder for graceful charity. And when in the graveyard, if you're attacked, you can summon him back to the field and negate your opponent's battle phase. But only if you don't have a hand, so hey. Doesn't come without a cost, but it's a good way to stop a push and be able to set up for plays next turn if having any other monsters on the field. So hey, he's pretty useful for defense, and he can then be used to push forward. Kind of a handy card to have. Then I have 2 roses. Her effect is simple with the whole 300 damage upon dealing damage. But the main reason I have Rose in the deck is because of the fact she's a level 4 tuner. This allows me to go into most of what my synchros are in my deck, so she's kind of important. Moving on, Noxious Coat God. He's a really good way of stopping your opponent from hurting you in the early game because, hey, most people are going to try throwing out the big beat sticks as fast as possible, so most won't even think of leaving a monster with less than 1900 attack on the field. So just by having this monster that has 1400 attack and 1200 defense in defense mode, you basically have left yourself with an iron wall they can't break, giving you time to survive. Next is Goblin Burg. When summoned, you can special summon another level 4 low monster from your hand, but change this card to defense position. This lets you be able to easily go into synchros or exceeds. It's a good way to rush out one of the extra deck cards, so I run one of him. That won't have too many because now I burn my hand out. Now we move on to Elementsaber Lapalaya. He's the other level 4 Elementsaber, who just so happens to have also the highest defense stat of all the base sabers. With the quick effect of being able to negate a spell trap card activation once per turn by sending a saber from your hand to the graveyard, it really does play into holding your opponent down once you've gotten a good offensive field. Because you just have this guy just standing on the side in defense mode, and then, the opponent's trying to negate your assault. Well, just send a saber and now you can fight through. So it's a pretty powerful card. Both as just a basic shield, because 2100 is, especially on a level 4 lower, is really good. And again, a negate helps a lot. Mallow. He's very much fitting of his fire attributes, as when this monster with 1700 attack and 200 defense sends a saber from your hand to a graveyard for its effect, you can send another Elementsaber or Elemental Lord from your deck to a graveyard. Meaning that you can effectively get 2 sabers in the graveyard for the price of 1. That is very valuable for trying to rush out your lords. Or just straight out thinning your deck out to have a higher chance of getting what you need. This tends to be the main way you use them, and again, as the second highest on offense, he tends to be one of the attackers of the deck. For at least the early stages of the duel. Needless effect is a interesting case, as the water attribute, she has an effect that is probably one of the least used, because it's honestly outshone by another monster in this Elementsaber, and its effect is so kind of nichey about when it can be used that most people, especially in most decks, will just run one Nelu so you can get the full 6 attributes. But as the middle grounder in both attack and defense, she's kind of your balanced fighter. With an effect to send that you can send an Elementsaber from your hand to the graveyard, then target one Elementsaber or Elemental Lord in your graveyard and add it back to your hand. Needless to say, that this effect lets you get back your lords, so you can resummon them, but there is something that kind of dwarfs that ability pretty hard. But we'll get into that later. Elementsaber Makani. Now, again, this is kind of like is the kind of opposite of Nelu. While it has a similar kind of concept, it works in a much better way. Because despite being, again, slightly more defensive but having a bit less attack, Makani has the effect of being able to let you send one saber from your hand to the graveyard, then add one Elementsaber Elemental Lord from the deck to your hand. Again, being able to search out your lords and get them straight into your hand lets you effectively mitigate their one drawback, which is them being a really brickish card. If you draw into them, you're pretty screwed, but if you can just straight up grab them when you need to, that kind of weakens their brickish threat in the mid to late game. Meaning that the only time you really have to worry about them is in the early game if you draw a lord, because you can't use it. And as I was saying with Neely's effect being dwarfed, here's Elementsaber Aina as the second highest defense in the game. Not in the game, but in the deck when it comes to the normal Elementsabers. For paying the cost of sending a saber to the graveyard, you can then target a Elementsaber or Elemental Lord that has been properly summoned by its own effect, and resurrect it. Meaning you can effectively respam their effects through Aina's effect. Needless to say, with things like Phosphorage and Red Rose, that can really rack on the pain. Then we have the Little Troopers. Again, for a warrior deck, it's a good defensive monster when it's a short by, especially someone else level 2 a little warrior, aka itself. And if you have noticed, Makani and Aina are both level 2 or lower, and so are my attack gainers, which I'll go over next. So you effectively get 4 shields, and they don't really bulk up your deck too badly as long as you don't draw into multiples. So they're good to have around. Speaking of the attack gainer, as the level 1 tuner, it lets me get into my lower level synchros. And also letting me weaken my opponent's attack power by 1,000, so that means I can get over some things that I couldn't otherwise. So hey, another card that has like a very few amount of uses, but can be used pretty well, especially since it can be summoned with Little Trooper, making it pretty useful. As you've noticed, my deck is entirely, and that does it for the warriors, and as you notice, outside of the elites here, everything else is warrior. And even among these guys, there are 2 warriors, so warriors are pretty much the big parts, so I do, in my spell cards, have reinforcements of the army. Again, being able to grab any of these guys I need at once is pretty handy. One Day Piece is a staple you find pretty much in any deck I build for RP because it's a card I like. Lets you draw a card that makes your opponent draw as well. But then neither player can take damage to your opponent's next turn comes to an end. This means you can really get away with some shenanigans of, if this card is the first card you draw, hey, I can make it so my opponent effectively has to make the first move. And again, it can also help save your life because, hey, if you can't take damage, you can't really lose via getting to 0 life points. Which in RP is pretty much what everyone aims for. So it definitely has its uses. Plus, since it lets you both players draw, that means that effectively you aren't losing anything and just giving your opponent a card for the sake of, you know, keeping you safe for a turn. Which can be both a risk and a reward. Speaking of risk and reward, Ledger of Ledger Maid. Personally, I really like the concept of this card, but it's pretty hard to find decks that can run it pretty well. The spell lets you banish the top 3 cards of the deck face down, and then 3 standby phases later you get to add those cards to your hand. Obviously that means you're down a card for 3 turns, which could mean the difference between life and death. But in return, once the 3 turns up, you get 3 cards. And that lets you really accelerate your plays. If you banish things that you don't need, hey, now you have a chance to gain what you need. But if you banish what you need, you're pretty screwed. But if you banish something that you, for example, would need later but don't need right away, then hey, you get it later now. So it's a really powerful card that comes with a lot of risk and a lot of reward. So it's a pretty fun card to play with. Then running Nightmares Through Cage. If you haven't noticed, this deck is kind of takes some time to get into gear, so having a means of slowing down your opponent from hurting you is handy. And so having the ability, and I didn't want just to run 2 swords, so I just ran a Nightmare Steel Cage instead. Which is a bit weaker since it only lasts for 2 turns and forces both players not to be able to attack, but it helps. It helps a lot. And then Swords of Revealing Light have the same reasoning. But also comes with the benefit of lasting an extra turn, doesn't make me lose the ability to attack, and it makes all your opponent's face down monsters visible to you, so. Pretty handy to have. Moving on, we have Card of Fate. Now, I really love this card for RP. Each player chooses a card they really want from their deck. Then at random, a person will blindly choose 4 cards they don't know what they are from their opponent's deck. The 5 cards I have chosen specifically from your deck get mixed together and one of them gets added to your hand. This effectively means that both players have a 1 in 5 chance of getting a card that could literally change the duel into their favor. It's a really fun card to mess with. Since it can help me basically get into a stupidly strong position or make my opponent get a dangerous advantage over me. And that gives it a bit of a fun factor in RP because no one knows what's going to happen. And then Gold Sarcophagus. I didn't want, which lets you banish a card from your deck for 2 turns and then add it to your hand. Now, I chose to have Gold Sarcophagus over Terraforming because, again, if you haven't noticed, there's only one of the field spell on the deck. Because just like Mana, that card got limited to 1 for the sake of the RP. And very justifiably so, because it is busted to all hell. And if I stalled early and got Palace, then a Terraforming would be a dead card in the hand. A Gold Sarcophagus takes a bit longer to set off, but hey, it lets you search anything. So hey, makes it a bit more versatile. Then we move on to Graceful Charity, which again, drawing 3 cards and just going 2 basically means you just exchange 3 cards out. You get 3 cards but then because you draw the 3 cards, you could choose to just send those away. I choose this over Power of Greed because, again, I want my sabers in the grave. Yes, my hand size is increased, but my deck gets filled out with the cards I need in the grave, making it very useful. Monster Reborn. Self-explanatory, lets me raise a monster from out of the player's graveyard. Pretty useful. Powerful Inquisitiveness. If you haven't realized, I have a few cards in this deck that will let me banish stuff. Especially specifically my monsters to get effects off. Getting those back and drawing a card to replace this one, pretty handy. Because this card lets you target 3 banished monsters, shuffle all 3 into the deck, and then draw a card. You can only activate once per turn, but hey, I only have 1, so that part doesn't affect me. Moving on to my 2 crit spells, Divine Phoenix Blade. Hey, gives me 300 attack. And I can manage 2 warriors to bring it back. Usually I what you would think you would want down sabers, but hey, that lets me get things of my Sikkim Knight in rows and such. These guys out of the way so I can, you know, not have them clog up and mess up me when I'm trying to summon out my lords. Once again, with the power, I can just get them back anyways. And again, having this card just freely add to hand means I have another card I can just safely fodder away if I need to for Graceful. Magnum Shield, oh boy! When equipped only to a warrior type monster and apply the effect of, depending on the battle position, of giving basically the other position's original stat to the position you're currently in. Your original defense to your attack, or your original attack to your defense. Let's see, my strongest warrior, Mana. Let's put the equip spell on him and have him go from my 2400 attacker to a 4500 attacker with 1 card. That means that a hard to kill monster now can be over a lot of stuff, giving you a lot of offensive power. And you can also let Lapalaya also go on offense, so hey, it has its uses. Moving on to the field spell, Palace of the Elemental Lords. The Elementsabers only have one spell and one trap, but they're also stupidly good because they are 3 effects in one. So, starting off with the Palace, this field spell gives all monsters you control attack and defense points equal to the number of attributes in your graveyard times 200. For reference, that means that at base flat value, you'll usually, once you have all your sabers in the graveyard, have a 1200 point boost to everything. That's a lot. Because again, that means almost all the sabers have the... In fact, all of the sabers will have their predominant stat over 2000. And a good number of them will even break 3000. That's a very, very powerful thing to have, because it lets you go from a deck that can only hold off and hope to get the Lords to being able to be on the offense. And the second effect is once per turn, you can add a element saber from your deck to your hand, but skip your next turn's battle phase. Again, a heavy cost, losing your next turn's battle phase. But if research of an element saber, like mana, can really power up your ability to play. Especially when coupled with its final effect, which is kind of where it breaks and becomes really good in RP. Besides the whole attack power bonus, this thing just adds so much more to it. Once per turn, if an element saber monster is in your hand or field would send cards from your hand to the graveyard, you can instead true effective send that many sabers from your deck to graveyard. What it means instead, it's poorly worded, but effectively what it means is you can treat all the element sabers in your deck as though they were in your hand. Meaning if mine was the only monster in my hand, I can still activate its effect because by all means I have all the sabers in my deck. And again, that means with Mana's effect, I get to pick and choose what effects I want to protect myself. Usually I just go with basic cannot be destroyed by battle or card effect, but depending on the situation, targeting can be useful too. And again, being able to use that effect once per turn means I could possibly be able to use Lapalaya easily on either player's turn without much issue. Or Makani, who now will thin the deck and then let me search a card, effectively taking 2 cards out of the deck. Needless to say, it really gives Elementsabers a lot of power. Which is why it will probably never be seen going up above 1 for the sake of the RP. Moving on now to the trap cards. We first have Reinforced Truth. It's a trap that lets you special summon level 2 little warrior, but you can't conduct your battle phase. But hey, it only lets you not conduct the battle phase of the turn you activate, so if it's your opponent's turn, no drawback. And it means you can quickly get out the likes of Makani, Aina, attacking, or more often than not, a little chip with a wall off your opponent's ability to attack you. Increasing your odds of getting out a trooper and, you know, blocking your opponent's ability to attack. Wabaku, you take no battle damage, and your monsters can't be destroyed by battle. Pretty self-explanatory. Keeps me alive for a turn, something that, again, is desired in this deck. Spirit Force. The damage I take becomes 0, so if they attack me, hey, now I don't get hurt. And then I get to add a warrior tuner from my graveyard back to my hand that has 1500 less defense. Both of the tuners I use have less than 1500 defense. Which means I can, again, set up. Heavy Storm Duster. It's basically Twin Twisters without the discard cost, but in return you lose the battle phase if the turn is activated. But hey, if you use it during your opponent's turn, no drawback. Again, it takes an extra turn to start off, but hey, wouldn't be a card without some weak point. Moving on with Bombless Trap Hole, another simple card that destroys a monster that has been summoned that has potential more attack, then banishes it. Again, let me give you something pretty scary pretty quickly. And here's my real force of choice for pre MR4 days is Quaking Mirror Force. Because if the particular attack change all the attack position monsters face down defense position and they can never change the position again. Meaning if your opponent has a full field ready to slaughter you, well now they have a full field of monsters that can't do much of anything. Which is why I use it. Drilling Shield, hey, blocking an attack and healing some life points can be useful. Because, hey, because this card lets you negate the attack that's been declared on you. And then gain 8 life points. You have to target the monster that attacks you, which can be a drawback. But not as often as you think, but also more common than you like. Pinpoint Guard, another resurrection card. Because if an opponent attacks, you can special summon a level 4 lower from your graveyard, and it's indestructible. So hey, I can bring back any of these guys to block my opponent's ability to hurt me. Slowly the indestructibility only lasts a turn, but hey, after that, the monster still stays. Next I have 2 Transmigration Prophecies. They let you return 2 cards from the graveyard back into the deck. Not just your graveyard though, your opponent's, which is where the fun comes in and why I run 2. You can return the cards you need back in your deck, i.e. like Lords, Star Power, Palace, or Equip Spell, or your Magnet Shield. Or if your opponent's trying to resurrect something from the graveyard, you can just throw that back into their deck, basically causing the effect to fail. This has been something that people have really come to hate me for, but hey, it works and it helps. You'll be surprised how often you can mess your opponent up simply by stopping their ability to bring something back from the grave. Ghost from the Past is basically a weaker Ghost of a Grudge. By banishing 2 cards from the graveyard, your opponent then target 1 attack position monster field, you can bring that monster's attack down to 0. Again, setting up for power acquisitiveness, and letting you basically turn an opponent's attack against them. The one thing that makes this have some advantage over Ghost of a Grudge in any way, shape, or form is the fact that you don't need to have your opponent have 8 cards in the grave. Something that is usually not an issue, but hey, the fact I could use this effectively for second turn is very useful. While Disruption similar means, hey, your opponent has a large field of monsters, well now those large field of monsters are all powerless. Because if an opponent declares an attack, all attack position monsters your opponent controls loses 800 attack for each monster they control. Hey Chaos Max, want to lose some power and become helpless? Because a max that effectively becomes a 4,000 point drop. There are very few things that have a base attack power above 4,000, so just to give you an idea of just how powerful this card can be. Sonic Stun is a trap that lets you negate an attack and then special summon a TG or a level 4 lower tuner from the deck. I don't have a TG, but I sure do have tuners I can summon. This lets me accelerate into my synchros and, of course, stop another attack. So hey, another card to add to the wall of cards that protect me. Scrap Iron is a staple for very good reason. When an opponent declares an attack, target the attacking monster and negate the attack. Also, after that, set this card face down against a 7 graveyards. Sorry about that. Instead of sending it to the graveyard. Which means you basically get to freely block a attack every single turn. Which has, if you've not noticed, been a lifesaver to me more times than I can count. Which is why this card is the card that you love to have in your deck but hate to have to face against. Because it's that obnoxious in RP settings. Now we move on to elemental training. Elemental training is again a continuous trap card, which is the Elementsaber trap, no less. So as I mentioned before, it has 3 effects. First off, its passive effect. Palace of the Elemental Lords cannot be targeted by card effects and cannot be destroyed by card effects, effectively keeping your palace safe from any form of harm, meaning your busted ass field spell gets to stay around. For an early game edge, it has once per turn you can tribute a monster and then special summon one Elementsaber of a different attribute from your deck. So if I send like a little trooper, I can't summon any, but I could summon any of the other sabers to the field. This lets you really accelerate into your place because you can tribute saber into saber. Then you thin out your deck and fill up your graveyard. And the third and final effect, which you rarely ever see, is that by sending this card to the graveyard and sending your entire hand to the graveyard with it, you can add elemental lords from your graveyard to your hand, equal to the number of cards you just discarded from your hand. Meaning, hey, I have 6 cards in my hand, all 6 lords on my graveyard. Let me just discard my entire hand and draw an entire, get all my lords back so I can do some really stupid stuff. So yeah, it can be really powerful as it can turn the tide in an instant. Finally, we have a negate attack. Pretty self-explanatory of why I have this one, because hey, it doesn't just stop a attack, it stops all their attacks for that turn, because when they declare an attack, target the attacking monster, negate the attack, and then end the battle phase. With that, we effectively move on into the extra deck. Along with the synchro I use the most, Crimson Blader, a 2800 attack with 2600 defense. Now imagine this guy with Magnum Shield and you realize why I have it. Because if this card destroys a monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, your opponent cannot know summon a special summon level 5 or higher monsters. Here's the thing, most people run decks that emphasize those levels. Very few decks will stick around to level 4s or lowers. So you basically cripple your opponent's ability to retaliate. Hence why it's in here. Then we have my Driven Daredevil, which is one of my level 7s. I only had one level 8. This requires purely warrior type monsters, so it's a bit of a drawback, but hey. Most of my deck is warriors anyways, I would use the synchro summon this. This card cannot be destroyed by battle with a monster with a higher attack. So it just can't be destroyed by battle. I don't know why it needs the whole higher attack bit. But then again, you could clash with it, but that would be a very weird and rare scenario. But after damage calculation, if this card was the one that was attacked, not when it attacks, just when it's the one attacked, the attacking monster is destroyed. So hey, he sticks around, he does damage, destruction. A level 7 I haven't used, Lightning Warrior, is a quick little burn. Because, hey, if you destroy a monster by bow with this card, you inflict 300 points of damage for each card in the hand. A bit of burn, and hey, it's another level 7 to go in the deck. Moving down to my 6s, Goyo Predator. With the effect that you all recognize so well from Goyos, when it destroys a monster, you can special summon that monster to your side of the field. You can summon in an attack, which is the boon over Guardian, but in return, any life point damage dealt is halved. Like, that's a big concern for you, though. You just stripped them of a powerful monster, and now are using that monster to beat them down. Now moving on to the next level 6 of my deck synchro is Gravity Warrior with 2100 attack and 1000 defense. This card gains 300 attack for each face-up monster your opponent controls. This caps out, of course, at 1500 for the sake of this RP because we're only using the 5 cents. We're not using extra, but if counting the extra, that gets even higher because extra monster sounds are a thing in MR5. You can also force your opponent's defense position monsters into attack and then force them to attack, meaning you can make them literally destroy their own defense. which is very, very, very useful. Will I've ever gotten that happen, but hey, it's a thing that exists. Next, we have Skilled Warrior, a level 5 with 2100 attack and 1000 defense. It, again, well, probably have seen this card a lot of times in the old episodes because I used it a lot because it basically redirects all attacks to it because you can't sorry, I have a speech pattern problem right there. Your opponent cannot target face-up warrior monsters for attacks except this one. And it also cannot be destroyed by battle once per turn, making it even harder to kill, and keeping some of your more vulnerable monsters protected. Moving on to a level 4, which I've rarely gone out, is Underworld Fire Balmung. This card is a 2100 attacker with 800 defense. If this card is destroyed by card effect, then hey, you get to summon resurrect a level 4 monster except this card. And that can give you again another means of defense or a means of going into other plays later. The only non-warrior in the extra deck, Mistburied Clazolas, who have honestly never got a chance to summon an RP, which makes me somewhat sad, but its main issue is it only has 300 defense but no attack. But it lets you basically drop an opponent's monster's attack to 0 and make it lose its effect, meaning that you can really render a lot of powerful monsters helpless, which can very much turn duels into your favor. Because again, you can just cut it down easily. Or if it's in defense mode, hey, it still lost its effect, so now it can't do that shenanigans on you. And that does it for the synchros. Moving on to the Exceeders. I have Comics Hero King Arthur, who again is a useful warrior for the fact that hey, you're trying to destroy him, I just detach the material. You take 500 damage and I gain 500 more attack. I mean, this thing can walk around as a 3400 attacker. Pretty nasty even without its chaos form. Then Blade Armor Ninja. 2200 attack doesn't seem like much, but when you consider the fact that this card basically is a double attacker, it can be very useful. Because by detaching a material, you can target a ninja monster, aka itself, and let it make a second attack each turn. Heroic Champion Excalibur. This guy has a simple fact. You attach 2 cards and its attack becomes double of what its original attack was till the end of your opponent's next turn. Then you get over a lot of things because hey, it's now 4000 attack. You can beat stick that will stay 4000 during your opponent's next turn. Another simple and easy card to go over. Then we have Zubaba General, which at the cost of the detach lets you equip a warrior to him and give attack equal to the combined attack of the monsters equipped to him, which can get pretty high if it isn't obvious. Because 2000 plus 24,500 plus 1900 is 6,300, which is a lot. So its effect is a simple one, and if you do it just with the main sabers, hey, its effect power isn't as high, but hey. It also means that when it's destroyed, you now get sabers in the graveyard. Good Cowboy, a 1500 monster, attack point monster with 2400 defense. If you have an attack position and use its detached, then when it attacks, your opponent uses 1000 attack, and this, then Gaga Cowboy gains 1000 attack and your opponent loses 500 attack during the damage step. Again, letting you get over things a lot easier. Anything with 3000 or less attack is pretty much done for. And once you include Plaza's 1200, that gets even higher. Probably, so that's even higher. Its main thing is, though, that when it's in defense, you can inflict 800 points of damage, so hey, you have a decent shield on your field, and you're burning your opponent for a few bits of damage. Then we have the Phantom Knight's Breaksword. With its detach effect, you break 1 card on your side of the field and 1 card on your opponent's side of the field. I can't use its other effects, so that doesn't matter. But hey, it lets me again get rid of something problematic pretty easily. Hence why it's in here. Finally, we have the Phantom Knights of the Cursed Javelin. Similar reason as the Mistbird is in here. With its detach effect, you can make this monster lose its attack and its effects. You can make the effect quite effective if you have a Phantom Knights material, but I don't because I don't use Phantom Knights. Again, the ability to render opponent's powerful monster helpless is valuable. Overall, this deck is built to be a slow start, so that you can have your defense to keep you alive, so that you can get to the point where you can summon your lords. And while it's not the most efficient deck out there, it definitely has done its job well. And with that, I hope you enjoyed this deck profile, and I hope to see you all next time. Bye bye!